Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this very frosty Wednesday morning for our introducing the ramsac Data Security Framework webinar. If I don't know you, my name is Dan May. I'm the Managing Director here at ramsac, and I'm joined by my colleague James.
Good morning.
James is one of our solutions architects and has been very heavily involved in the project to design our data security framework. We're going to spend the next half an hour talking you through what this project is all about, and just sharing with you some thoughts around best practice, and explaining how the framework works. Tats is keeping an eye on the Q&A, so if you've got questions as we go, please pop them in the Q&A, and when James and I finish talking, Tats will come in and pose any questions to us. So if you've got questions as we go, just record those in the Q&A and we'll get to those at the end. Webinar is being recorded today and we'll share that with you afterwards as well, in case you want to share this with any of your colleagues. So with that, let's kick right off. So what we're going to do today is talk to you about the framework that we've created around managing data predominantly in Microsoft 365. But before we do so, I think it's useful just to talk about why and why that's important. I think it's fair to say that data has become more challenging in the last 5 years than ever before. And this isn't just about cybersecurity. This is just about where data is. It is the absolute backbone to all of our organizations. And over the last, sort of 10 years, really, since a whole-scale adoption of Microsoft 365, particularly SharePoint and OneDrive, the amount of data stored has just grown exponentially. And 64% of UK businesses are now managing at least 1,000 terabytes of data in Microsoft 365, and that's just huge. And the fact that we're no longer sort of confined by physical disk spaces, and we no longer get that little red image of a nearly full disk when we look at our file browser, means that it's just grown exponentially. And I think if you're here as a business owner or a data manager or an office manager, it's really hard to feel that any of that is under control. There's a real confusion about where data is stored. We've got so many applications across the 365 suite, and how do you know what's stored where? We've got documents in SharePoint, we've got documents in Teams, in OneDrive, in Loop, in Power BI, all over the place. There's a real risk associated with historical links, and James and I are going to talk about that in a moment. But really, these next three blocks, the historical links, the oversharing, and the routine collaboration is a phenomenon of cloud working that just didn't exist before. So if we roll back 10 years, maybe even less for those that sort of did big migrations as a result of the pandemic, if we think back to how we used to work, our data was designed really to be worked internally. So most data sat on file on servers, on file servers, and it existed neatly behind a firewall, and we controlled quite easily, really, who could access what. And documents were not shared outside of our organization. If I wanted to share a Word document or an Excel document with the client, I had to attach a copy of it to an email. Whereas now, we've got loads, great benefits in terms of being able to routinely collaborate, and all of the 365 suite has been set up to collaborate. So we all work on shared files and folders with people in and outside of our organization. But that has brought its own challenge. People have shared links to folders with good intention, but nobody then goes back and unshares. So some of those shares have existed for 5, 6, 7 years maybe, and we don't necessarily keep a track on, well, what other data has been added to that folder that I shared and forgot I'd shared. So how much are we oversharing, who's got access to what, and who controls what, is a problem that is just growing and growing and growing. And there's real challenges for you as business owners or office managers or data managers in that lots of you have to, well, everyone has to comply with some form of regulation, even if that's just at the basic level, complying with GDPR. But lots of our customers are in regulated industries, or they're governed by processes like ISO 27001. And the need to be able to satisfy industry regulation or standards organisations that you've really got this under control is growing. Every week when we turn on the news, we see data breaches, big high profile data breaches like we saw with Marks and Spencer and the Co-op, for example. So we're all really conscious of the reality of data breaches, and our cybersecurity team here are dealing with probably sort of 20, 30 breaches on average a week now, which just didn't exist 5 years ago. And then we layer on top of that the advent of AI tools, things like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, which we are giving access, particularly in Copilot, we are giving access to all of our data in Microsoft 365, and how do we cope with that as well? So that's just a bit of scene setting, really, to say this is real, this is a real problem. We've got terabytes and terabytes of data sat across all kinds of applications, and it's really hard to know who can access what, and it's really hard to know even what you've got, who shared links that might be 5 years old and long since forgotten, but are still actually active on the system. And so that's why we've come up with our data security framework. And the data security framework is a series of pieces of work, really sort of 5 core steps that we think every organisation should be going through. And it starts with an assessment, and it works all the way round to a programme of ongoing maintenance and ongoing development of policy and continuous assessment. And what we want to do for the next sort of half an hour or so is talk through what that looks like and what it means, and show you some examples of what good looks like, and talk to you about our own learnings, actually, because we were our own guinea pig on this, and James, you were really heavily involved in that project. So what we learned going through that process, and kind of provide you with a framework of 5 key steps that we think every organisation should take in terms of managing data in 365. So this is a sort of a summary of our framework, but let's go into it in detail. And we start with stage 1, which is an assessment. So James, I'm going to bring you in here. So what do we mean by an assessment? What tools do we use, and what does that look like? What's assessment stage all about?
So there's a couple of reasons we've got to this point already. So it could have been, like you said, it could be compliance. So it could be particularly things like ISO 27001 that might have driven us here. It might be that we've done a Copilot readiness assessment and we've flagged that perhaps data security, we need to look at that before we start looking at investing in these Copilot tools. Or it could be perhaps you've done like a lift and shift in COVID from your file server up into SharePoint, and you've never really come back to reviewing your permissions, and actually now's a good time to do that. So for us, the assessment is the starting point in all of this. So effectively, this is around working out where your sensitive data is and who's got permission to it. That's kind of it in a nutshell. And the way that we do that is that we use some clever tools from a company called AdPoint that allow us to scan across SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, and basically get a bit of an assessment. And as part of that, we're going to look at what site structures have you got in place. We're going to look at who's got permission to those structures as well up in SharePoint, perhaps who's got maybe granular permissions to particular files, and looking at sharing links. So the reason that sharing links are so important in this process is because they provide direct access to files in SharePoint. So it's really important we understand what type of links we set and who's got access to those. So are these anyone links that anyone can have access to this data without signing in? Are these organizational links, so anyone within the organization can access that? Or are these specific where you share just saying, I just want to share things with you, Dan? So all of this, we're going to scan across this AdPoint tool, scan it across your 365 estate, and out of that is going to come quite quite a chunky report that we're going to then share with you and talk through to go, right, this is the state of play, and then that's going to feed into what we do next.
So when you say anyone links, so it's fair to say, I think, isn't it, that by default, Microsoft is designed around collaboration, or SharePoint in particular is designed around collaboration rather than security best practice. And the default setting, if that's never been changed, is if I create a file, anyone that has a link to that file can access it. And that is anybody, not just inside my organization, but anybody I share a link with.
Exactly. So I think you've got to be careful here. And most people don't know there's different types of links you can set up in SharePoint. So you're right. By default, Microsoft want us to be very collaborative. They want us to share information, but that doesn't always align to best practice. So you have to be really careful when you're creating these links that you're not then oversharing any information. So as part of this, we're going to look at where we talk about identify risks and sensitive data. Where's that sensitive data held and how's it being accessed? Are we oversharing? Have we got the default settings right? Or do we need to look at tightening that up?
And when you talked about those sort of those bigger picture permissions, that's about things that a lot of people will be familiar with, but like, have we created a document library in SharePoint that is only accessible by payroll team, one that's only accessible by HR users, and then it's just sanity checking how many of those document libraries exist and giving you a report of actually who's got access. So that so we can sit with an organisation and go, okay, these are the 4 people that can access anything stored in this particular document library. Is that correct? Is that the right for people?
Exactly that. So we're going to say, right, we've got this finance site, we've got these 4 people that access that. Is that correct? By the way, we've accidentally sent up organisational links to documents in that site. So in theory, anyone in the organisation could access those files if it's been shared. So we need to get a bit of an understanding of where that all sits.
So stage 1, as an assessment, we run a load of tools. And the result is, and I've seen the result because we did this for ourselves, it's pages and pages and pages of reporting, right?
Exactly. So there's going to be a bit of work internally, and typically that's going to involve working with heads of department to go and say, right, this are the permissions to your site, finance site, it is correct. Or do we need to look at making any changes? So it's going to be, it's going to be a pretty comprehensive report.
Just like an e-discovery, right, of where data is being stored, because we don't always know where people have gone off, and some teams have started to use an application that we didn't even know was in use potentially. So
exactly.
Excellent. Okay. So stage 1 is an assessment, fairly quick to run, but then maybe a few weeks' work to do the analysis of, I'm assuming.
That's correct. Yeah.
And then once we've got that data, we move on to stage 2 of this framework, which is essential actions. So what do you consider the essential actions? What does that look like?
So what we're looking for in this stage is potentially some quick wins here that we want to try and implement to sort of immediately improve that security posture and have an instant impact. So that could be, for example, that we're cleaning up some old data. Perhaps we've identified there's a particular site that or particular teams that have been set up years ago that no one accesses anymore. So let's look at immediately looking for some quick wins to clear those out. We're going to have a look at your SharePoint structure. Again, taking an example, did you do a lift and shift? Is everything sat in one SharePoint site? Would we be better off actually splitting that out so each department has their own site and we can manage it a bit better that way around? Looking at things like permissions, that's a really key one, making sure that only the people that should have access to that data do. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into that to say, have we got the right permissions on this? Once we've got that, those are kind of the core foundations. We're going to start looking at sharing links and looking at the defaults. So again, we might decide, well, we don't want by default anyone in the organisation to access that or have access to that file. So perhaps we're going to be a bit more restrictive in our settings. We're going to lock it down. So when you share it, only people you share in your email, you specify in the email will have access to that file. So we're going to actually start reducing that chance that you're going to accidentally start oversharing things as well. And part of this, and this is where the beauty of the endpoint tooling comes in, it allows you actually to clear out legacy links as well. So you might just decide, do you know what, I've got 20,000 organizational links. Let's just clear all of that out and let's start from afresh.
So you don't necessarily have to go through a list of 20,000 links and go, well, I need that, I don't need that. I think when we did ours, we took an organizational decision, and we just cleared off a load of stuff that was aged. And then we thought, we'll just deal with the fallout. We'll deal with the 1 or 2 that we probably shouldn't have deleted, and we'll deal with those as exceptions rather than having to go line by line through every page of data.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. So that's the approach we took. So really just dialing back those sharing settings there. So we might look at restricting sharing permissions to people that we share sort of outside the organisation. So, you know, we're really familiar and really common with sharing with customers, with suppliers, we're sharing with guests outside. So how do we want them to access that data? And do we want a separate site for sharing, and do we want to lock it down that way round? So, you know, again, these are the things that you can do to kind of separate out your site to make it a bit more logical as well.
And then we did that internally, didn't we? We created a separate SharePoint site for client sharing so that you couldn't accidentally overshare some internal documents. You had to deliberately move something to an external share site on SharePoint. So it was a deliberate decision to share rather than an accidental overshare.
Exactly. And that fed into a new way of working, but, you know, we made the decision we wanted to separate that out and manage it differently as well.
So stage one is analysis and creating a load of data, which gives us, I guess, a scale of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then stage two is what are the quick wins? So essential actions. So if we go no further than stage two, we've ended up in a better position than we started already.
Absolutely, yeah.
However, the trouble with only doing those kind of, I guess, essential actions is that clears up for today. And it means that you're in a better place than you were yesterday, but that's where it stops. And I guess stage three is about putting those technical controls in place that then enforce good behaviour moving forward, right?
Exactly.
So what are we talking about with technical controls?
So with technical controls, we're trying to implement, in particular, labels for documents in SharePoint, and also to email as well. But specifically, what we're talking about here is stage two. We sort of tidied up the foundations here. We've got our permission structures right. We've got our sharing links correct, and then we sat down and said, well, what happens if we've got our finance site, we've got our payroll information in there, and someone accidentally copies that into a common SharePoint site? You know, that's an example of accidental oversharing, but how do we safeguard against that? So this is where we start looking into the technical controls. So what we're talking about here specifically is a feature called sensitivity labels. And this is a feature that's included in things like Business Premium in your 365 licensing. So actually, a lot of people have this already and don't realise.
So no additional cost, you know, assuming you're on like a Business Premium license as a minimum, no cost to turn this on, but just some configuration.
Exactly.
Now, I get quite excited about this. We've got some examples, excited in a kind of geeky way, but my biggest concern internally, and certainly what we see from, you know, the sort of the 60,000 support incidents that we do in a year, is there's more unintentional breaches than there are bad actors maliciously breaching. So the most common breach that we see is, or the most common sort of ICO reportable incident that we see isn't that I was hacked, actually. It's that I accidentally sent this really sensitive data on an email to the wrong person. Yes. And I don't think there's anybody watching this webinar that won't have done that at some point. You're thinking about somebody, and therefore you tell their name into the Outlook, and I think, you know, I'm sending to James. I quickly type James. I just press enter, and I've accidentally selected the wrong James. So let's show what this means. So this labeling exists in a few places, and the first place that it exists is within an email. So we've got this turned on our system, and we created our own label. So this is an example of me sending an email to James about upcoming pay increase information. And I really want to make sure that this email isn't going to be read accidentally or deliberately by the wrong person. So all I've done here is within my email, I've gone into the settings, I've literally clicked the three dots here, I've chosen sensitivity, and then these are the labels that ramsac has turned on. So what do these labels mean?
So these are the labels. So this is where you set up and define what your labels are and what they do effectively, what access they have. So you can be quite granular in the way you set it up. You can set up different labels for different people and different roles in the organisation as well. So in this example here, Dan, you've got 5 labels, whereas I've only got 2 labels that I can choose from. So let's just talk through them quickly. So internal only. So if you apply that label to this email, then what that means is only people within ramsac can read that email. So if you were to try and forward that outside the organisation, it's going to be sent, but the person at the other end won't be able to read it.
So it just comes up as a blank email in their inbox.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas then you can start getting a bit granular. So we've got finance directors, HR. So again, these have got different permissions set around them. The finance team, the directors, see people in HR, that you can do that. So again, anything that has one of those labels will be restricted to who's in that finance or directors group or HR group.
And we tailor this for every client. So this isn't an out-of-the-box set of labels. We've determined what labels we want. So every client watching, they know that, okay, well, this could be a project label, and we just kind of put users into a group in the back end and say these people can access the finance label or the director's label.
Exactly. We've done it by job role, but it could be, for example, if you've got a particularly sensitive project, Project X, you could create a separate label and just publish it to that, people in the Project X team effectively.
Yeah. Well, what I really like, and I think it's worth pointing this out, what I love about this is, I can send this label, I can send this email to you now, I can choose the finance label, and I send this to you. And now if you were the right person and you're in the finance group, you can see this email. But if you're going a bit rogue on me, you can't then forward this email to your friends, right? So I have controlled the data that I have sent from me to you is only for you because you are in that finance label in this example.
Exactly. One thing that's common with labels is they travel with the email or the document you assign them to. So once they've left SharePoint or email, then that label continues to stay.
So even though you've got permission in ramsac to receive this email, if you then forward this to your own Gmail account, you can't read it on your Gmail account.
Correct.
Brilliant. Thank you. And it's just worth mentioning the confidential tag means it can only be sent to the people whose names are in the to field.
Exactly. So that's a bit more user defined. So that's where you get to pick your own permissions on that label.
Now, one of the things I like about the confidential tag is we've got clients that, so I have the situation myself. I have a delegated admin on my email account. So I have Kaylee, who's my assistant, and Kaylee can see my inbox. But and we've got clients that have struggled with this before, where they say, well, I love the fact that somebody's delegated permission to my inbox, but there are times when I want an email to be sent that person can't see. But that confidential tag works well. So if you send me an email with that confidential tag, Kaylee, who's in my inbox, can see that you sent me an email, but it's a blank screen. You can't see the attachments, you can't see the details. So really good solution for people that need to have that sort of delegated access.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in emails, but it exists in documents as well, doesn't it? So in exactly the same way. So this is my slide deck that I was working on for this presentation. I've stored it in my OneDrive, and I can do exactly the same. I can put an internal, so the previous example was looking at emails. This is us looking at any document that exists in Microsoft. And just to show a real clear use case of this, again, as you said, James, the label lives with the document. So let's just say, for example, I've got an Excel spreadsheet that has got lots and lots of sensitive data. It might be payroll data, it might be all of my client pipeline data, for example. We get a lot of clients that call in to say, I'm really worried because this person has left. I'm worried that they might have downloaded data before they went. The fact that the label lives with the document is really important here. So I can send you a spreadsheet of sensitive data. I can protect it with an internal only tag. You could copy that data to a USB key or email it to yourself at your Gmail account. You could resign, please don't, but you could resign tomorrow. As soon as I shut down your Office 365 permissions, doesn't matter if you stored a local copy of that file, you can't open it, can you?
Exactly. What will happen is you'll try and open it, and then it will prompt you to log in with your email address. Because you've shut down my account, that's it. It's going to restrict access to that document there and then.
So I think that's really, really powerful. And I think this is the stuff that, is really reassuring for business owners. I can control what you can access even after you've left. So long as I shut down your 365 account, if you're a bad leaver, then I've shut down access to anything you've made a copy of.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And data loss prevention is part of this at a light level at this stage, isn't it? So tell us, what does DLP mean?
So this is how we put policies and technical controls in place to effectively stop data leaking outside the organisation. So what we've done here is probably just quite a common one. We've just set up some a rule with some logic, which effectively says, if you're sending an attachment to someone outside the organisation, what it's going to do is going to pop up with a tooltip just to warn you. And you're going to have to then override that if you want to send the email here. So
because you're sending this email to an external from ramsac address, you've made an attachment and it's just popped up to say,
it popped up there to say, you're about to send this externally, are you sure? And it's just, it's there to help you sense check just to make sure that you're actually got the right recipient in there. Is that the classic example? I was typing in your name and actually came up with an external down instead. And it's just that I guess that final sense check, and then if you're happy, you can override the warning and then send the email there.
Brilliant. So not foolproof, but it's just a prompt at this stage. We'll talk about how we make it a bit more foolproof at stage 4, I think. Brilliant. So stage 3 then, technical controls. This is about implementing tools that people can use to give themselves some reassurance. Exactly. In a way, I love this. As I say, the thing that always panics me, we've got lots of sensitive data on our client. It's so easy to append the wrong or the report and send it to the wrong person. And this is the bit that I really love, because we encourage people to put labels on all of those reports. So if I do accidentally select the wrong person, okay, it's a bit embarrassing that they have said, "Oh, I don't think you meant to send this to me," but they can't actually open the file. So I think this is real reassurance. But it's not really enough, is it? So that's where we go into stage 4 of our framework, which is a little bit more about automatically enforcing some of this stuff. Tell us about that.
Exactly. So it's probably worth mentioning here that everything we've spoken about, you could do with a business premium license. But actually, where we get into this stage here, you're going to then particularly need to uplift your licensing. So this is where you're into the enterprise E5 licensing or buying add-ons to what you've got. So it's not immediately ready. But what we're talking about here is, how do we take what we just talked about, but how do we sort of automate that and enforce that? So what we're talking about here is it's effectively automatic labeling in a simple sense. So any document I save into a particular SharePoint site, rather than me having to remember to classify that document, it automatically gets a label. So that could be, you've got a common area in SharePoint, you just want it to have an internal only label on there. It could be anything I create within the finance site, I just want it to get my finance label on there. So it's kind of reducing that risk of human error and trying to remember to actually label those documents. It's just taking it out of the user's hands, really.
So we talked about so far up to stage 3 is a user being in control of putting these measures in place, but this takes the guesswork out. So because this document is stored on finance in the finance folder, it's automatically going to be prevented from being able to be sent externally, for example.
Exactly, because the logic is, if you're creating a document in the finance site, you're always going to want it to have a finance label.
But it saves a human having to remember to do that.
Exactly.
Excellent.
And then you might look at this and say, do we actually want to automatically enforce labels? So every document that's created has to have a label to it. That's potentially another way of doing it, to prompt people to do that. It may be that actually you want to take this stage to look at, are there any other labels you want to create? I know that when we first started this, we started quite small, and then as people got more used to working with labels, we suddenly said, well, actually, wouldn't it be great if we had another label that could do this, or another one that could do that? Yeah. So sort of expanding your armory of labels as well as part of that.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. So let's just do a quick recap of where we're at so far. So stage 1 was understanding what we've got. Where is our data? Where is it stored? What's been shared that we didn't even know had been shared? What are all our permissions in things like SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams and all that kind of stuff? Stage 2 is fixing the immediate. It's going in and going, oh crikey, I didn't know that 5,000 sharing links have been shared over the years. Let's shut those down. Let's put some control in place. So immediately I'm in a better state than I was yesterday. Stage 3 is then turning on some of these tools around sensitivity labels as an example. And stage 4 is enforcing that. So it's not an option. Now, we talked in stage 3 about DLP light, data loss prevention light. There's something a bit more we can do at stage 4, isn't there, with that sort of E5 licensing around data loss prevention?
Yeah, so perhaps, so taking back to the example where we've emailed a label as internal only, that's allowed us to send that email out, but obviously the recipient can't read it if they're not part of ramsac. Maybe you might turn around and say, well, actually, do you know what? We never want that email to leave in the first place. So anything that's got a finance label on it, just block it from being shared or sent outside the organisation automatically. So we can start linking these back to our labels as well.
And also in data loss prevention, am I right in saying that there's stuff you can do here that even if there are no labels, the DLP policy can automatically detect things like personally identifiable information, credit card details, that kind of stuff, and it can automate some rules around that?
Exactly. So you might say, well, actually, we'll look at that and say, if there's anything that's got, passport number, NHS numbers, we just automatically want to apply a label to that as well. So we can start, being quite granular around what we do on that. So stage 3 was just quite a simple, let's just send an email tooltip just to make sure people aren't sending out a document to anyone external. And stage 4, we're starting to really tighten the screw on this.
Excellent. So we've done all of that, and it's fair to say this is, an iterative process. This might take weeks or even months to get to this point. Then stage 5 in our framework is ongoing maintenance. So what does that look like?
So I guess what we're saying here is this whole kind of piece is not a one and done type thing. It's going to require some ongoing maintenance as well. So this stage for us is around, how do we ensure you stay at that desired state around compliance and security, having spent all the work to actually get there in the first place? And there's different ways you might do that. Perhaps you might want to do regular permission reviews. So perhaps like you in stage 1, if you remember, we used Endpoint to do the actual scanning. Perhaps you want to keep those tools in place and actually conduct regular reports. We're probably familiar with the term permission creep, where people change job roles or perhaps leave the organisation. How do we then make sure that they still have access to the information they need as well? So perhaps we might want to do some regular reviews on that as well. We might just, take a step back here and just appreciate this is a new way of working here. So do all our data locations reflect who needs access? So we gave an example here about restructuring. Perhaps you might want to look at this down the line and go, do you know what, actually, we've now got a requirement to change the way we work. So we're going to need a different site. So I know we've done these, we've got a main external sharing site. We've also tacked on a finance external site as well, for then when we actually need to share quite sensitive information.
Exactly. So ongoing maintenance then is about saying you've just done all of this work, invested all of this time, run all of those reports, put all of the good stuff in place, but then there is an ongoing, perhaps like quarterly review, I guess, exactly, of saying, is it still looking how we think it would? What's changed? So always rerunning that Endpoint report once a quarter to go, since we last looked at this, another 100 shares have been created. Are we happy with all of these shares? Has anything changed?
Exactly. How do we make sure we don't go backwards, having put all the good work in there?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we might want to look at, again, looking at our DLP policies that we mentioned there. So we talked about things like credit card information, NHS numbers. Perhaps we want to update that. Perhaps things have changed and we now need to put some different controls in place. And finally, doing a bit of a periodic review about our written policies as well.
Brilliant. And I know we're going to talk about written policies in a moment, but this all kind of links to good governance, doesn't it? Like data is, as we said right at the start of this presentation, data is the backbone of our organisations. Whatever we do, whether we're in a regulated industry, whether we're not for profit, whether we're manufacturing or in legal, we all depend on this data. And there's lots of things we have to comply with, whether that's GDPR, whether that's ISO 27001, whether we've got Cyber Essentials. I mean, Cyber Essentials is specifically looking now at data loss prevention, isn't it?
So exactly. I mean, it's creeping up everywhere now. So we need to make sure our written policies are there. They sort of underpin this. They set out the tone around how users should expect to work with the data, what is expected of users as well. So it's really, really important that we keep those things up to date, in line with sort of the latest compliance.
And I think that's really good, isn't it? That's a really good point. Written policies do still have a place. Everything we talked about so far is the IT department putting in place the tools that prevent accidental oversharing or accidental data loss. or malicious loss. But the written policy is not even the IT department's job, really, is it? This is the business saying, this is what good needs to look like in my organisation. So there is still a place for written policy. I mean, I don't like written policies in as much as, it's no good me writing a policy that says, don't send the wrong email to the wrong person, because that's completely unenforceable and means nothing to you. And, you might look at that written policy in your induction, but you're never going to go and look at it again. So I don't like written policies as a control mechanism because I think they're fairly useless. But written policies are important in terms of defining what this organisation needs. So we are a law firm and we are governed by, Law Society guidelines, GDPR, and we're an ISO 27001 firm. Therefore, the policy in this organisation is we need to have this in place, this in place, and this in place. And it's almost like we need to work with clients first to understand what good needs to look like for them. Then we roll out all of this work.
Yeah, and for us, actually, one of the first questions around implementing the technical controls is how do we align them to your written policy? So what is expected of users and how can we actually implement those controls to align with that as well?
Yeah,
so, yeah, it's really important and it's a continuous process as well. And we know that things like best practices change. So it's really important that while we talk about...
Well, policies change. I mean, Cyber Essentials is updated every couple of years, isn't it, with a new set of requirements?
Exactly. So it's really important that we keep up to date on that as well.
So that's our framework, essentially. We've implemented all of this ourselves. We always use ourselves as our sort of guinea pig clients. And I know you were really heavily involved in the ramsac sort of implementation. There were some learnings, I think, from what we went through. So let's talk about that. What were the sort of the headlines of the things that we discovered and maybe the challenges that we had along the way?
Okay. So I'm going to sort of bundle the first 3 points here on this slide up and just sort of talk about it as one. So I think the first thing that we learned is be patient. It's not an overnight change that we're making here. So for us, we ended up taking our time and, for us, it ran over about 12 months. It doesn't have to do that for organisations, but for us, that was our particular journey about what we wanted to do. So number one is patience is key because, you could be making a lot of changes here. You could do a data ordering. There could just be hardly anything to change. So to bear that in mind, but that's for us, one of our learnings. Lots of comms around this, lots of communication, and that needs to be driven by an internal sponsor. So what we mean by that is having someone internally that's really championing this, the labels, they're promoting that. So for us, that was Peter, our technical director. So we had lots of communication on our intranet. We've had guides that have been circulated about how to use labels, when should you use a label. And then again, in team meetings, a lot of this is referenced again. So because, effectively what we're talking about is a new way of working here, you're implementing, and that's changing behaviours for the better. But that's still, that takes time and that's not an overnight change as well. So getting into the habit of applying labels to documents, understanding that, when you're trying, if you do send an attachment to someone externally, you're going to get a warning message and you're going to have to override that. And it's there to effectively help you, but it's a new way of working.
I think it's really important. That internal sponsor thing is we can do all of this from a tech point of view, but somebody in the organisation needs to set the parameters in the first place. Like we always say, don't we, the data security is not an IT responsibility, it's a board responsibility. So the whole business, the whole organisation needs to be behind this. So the key sponsor of the client is about saying, this is what we know we want to do, but then that ongoing communication piece to manage those user expectations, this is changing. But also because this whole scheme is designed that you don't have to do all 5 steps. You might do step 1 and step 2 and then stop. But if we get to step 3, which is we turn on all of these tools, if we then don't educate users as to why they should use those tools, then it's a pointless process. No one will ever use them.
Absolutely. And again, just, we learned a few things here. We've got improper use of the new controls and unintended consequences. So what I mean by that, we've had a couple of things where we perhaps deleted some links and that someone was sharing a planner that was hidden in a team. That was quite a niche one to find, but it was quick to sort out. But that was an example of that. Again, where we put labels, we've had internal only labels that have been sent to clients. And of course, the client can't open the document because they're not part of ramsac. So the label's doing what it's doing. But, we had to then reshare that. And actually, we're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Perhaps we're challenging the way that it would work as well.
It's like all good cybersecurity measures, there's an element of inconvenience, and it's a necessary inconvenience, but you have to manage the user expectation around that. So it's not that the IT team have come in and deliberately broken something. It's that we've put a measure in place which is right for 99%, but there were these 1% outliers that we didn't think about, that we just need. And nothing was hard to fix. Like, we were able to quickly change a label or move a SharePoint folder, weren't we?
Yeah.
But there was some initial inconvenience that we just had to say to users, that is going to be a feature. Unfortunately, it's not an IT failure. It's just that you can't physically go through 1,000 terabyte of files and plan each single one. That would just be a really bad use of time.
You'd never get off the
so you kind of have to go with the majority of this will be right, and then we'll deal with the odd fallout.
Exactly.
That's really useful. Thank you. That sounds all quite negative, but there were lots of benefits as well from the work that we went through. And I think, from my perspective as one of the business owners, this has given me a sense of reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have seen a reduction in human error. If I look at the last 5 things that we logged on our data protection log before we went through this, it was the last 5 things logged were the incorrect attachment being sent to the wrong person.
Yeah.
That's just really embarrassing, if nothing else, especially for us as a tech business. But it is human, and every human has done it, but it is embarrassing. And I think that it just removed that risk for me, and that gives me reassurance. And I think, from my perspective, it's that reassurance that my data is protected, even if somebody has made their own copy of it. No, it's never been an issue here, but we work with quite a lot of recruitment consultants, and it was often a requirement, wasn't it, with our recruitment clients, that they were really worried about an agent leaving them and going to a competitor the next day and just quickly downloading from the database the best candidates. And it's about that you just can't do that anymore if you turn all of this on. So lots of reassurance and lots of control. I think it's fair to say as well, there are risks of not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
What's that look like to you, do you think?
So I guess we talked about it. This is mainly around data loss, whether that be accidental data loss, whether that be malicious data loss. That's effectively what we're trying to prevent by doing all of this. Because we know that actually, if you do suffer data loss, you can have some downtime associated with that, and that can be not only hugely disruptive, but it can be fatal for some businesses as well. So.
And that risk of regulatory fine as well, we've got that on the slide. That's real, isn't it? I think people think, oh, well, that happens to Marks and Spencers. I mean, Marks and Spencers have quoted, however many sort of billions of pounds their loss was from their recent sort of cyber breach. And interestingly, actually, that is a long way from being finished. I heard on a commercial radio station the other day, I heard an advert pop up for, do you have a Marks and Spencers online account? We're taking a class action against Marks and Spencers for the data loss that happened in that breach. So it's easy to see those big company things and just think, well, that happens to other people. But actually, we see it for small businesses as well. DPP Law was a small, like sub-100 user law firm. They've got a £60,000 fine from the ICO for failure to have decent data protection control. I think in their case, actually, they didn't have MFA turned on. But this isn't just a big company threat, is it?
Absolutely. You're facing disruption, you're facing data loss, there's financial loss and reputational loss.
And I've got here that insurance is not a silver bullet. Just to be really clear, we recommend every client has really good cyber insurance in place. I think it's probably the most important insurance policy you can have in place. But to rely on insurance is not what we would do in any other part of our lives either, isn't it? I've got home insurance, but I still lock my front door and set the alarm when I go out, because I'm not relying on the fact that I've got insurance to think, well, it's fine. If my house is broken into, I can just replace all this stuff anyway. So insurance is really the backstop. It's the worst case resort, really, isn't it?
Definitely. We recommend you have it, but we want to do all these proactive actions to stop
you needing it.
Yeah.
And actually, increasingly, we see really large excesses as well. And, so you don't want to be claiming on your insurance for what might have been a £10,000 cost, for example.
Exactly.
James, thank you. That's been really useful. So let's just bring this framework up again and kind of do our summary. So this 5-step program starts with an assessment, starts with finding out what you don't know, what should you have in place. We go through, we fix the essentials, we fix the immediate need. We then implement some technical controls, some sort of level 1, level 2 technical controls. We then move into best practice enforcement of those controls, and then an ongoing program of maintenance, continuous assessment, updating the written policies. And I think it's fair to say we think every organisation should go through this framework, but it is okay, isn't it, just to go, actually, I'm just going to do step 1 and step 2. And for some of our clients, that's where they've stopped. They've never moved on to step 3 or step 4.
Yeah,
it's better to do something than nothing.
Absolutely. And I think just a nod back to things like Copilot we talked about around security as well. So one of the biggest sort of barriers that we typically see here about organisations implementing the full Copilot 365 license, which allows you to search across your entire 365 estate, is around data security. And what we mean by that is Copilot inherits the permissions that you have. So if you've been given access to the payroll file, you may not know that, but Copilot will be able to go away and search that. So this is why another reason in particular, we want to actually make sure the permissions are locked down in the first place. So you're not oversharing and Copilot doesn't have access to that. And Copilot respects sensitivity labels. So what we talked about in step 3 and step 4, if you have a label on that document that is finance only, and you're not in the finance team, Copilot's not going to be able to search for that and pull back information on this. And I've been doing some sort of testing as well. I found that the other day that I've got an internal only label on a particular document. I wanted to upload that into Copilot chat to get a summary, and Copilot couldn't read it because the label again blocked access.
So this is good. I mean, this is good practice, and I think it's a really good point, James. We probably didn't talk about that enough, did we? And it's not just Copilot either, is it? It's all of those. So a lot of the clients we talk to at the moment are worried because they say, "Well, I haven't bought Copilot licenses and I haven't bought ChatGPT licenses, but I don't know whether my staff are going out using free versions of ChatGPT." But if you upload a document with a label into a free, non-corporate sponsored version of ChatGPT, again, the ChatGPT can't see it.
Exactly.
So really, I guess what you're saying then is for any organisation thinking about turning on these AI tools, at the very least, step 1, 2, and 3 should be a prerequisite, really, before you turn on those tools.
Absolutely. To really have peace of mind. Yeah.
James, thank you. And that's been really useful. And thank you to everyone that's joined us today to listen to us talk through this process. That's us done for today. James, thanks for being part of the webinar today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone for joining us. And we look forward to speaking to you soon. Many thanks.
Thanks a lot.